Hello, this is John Majori with Majori on Bowie, and this is the Majori on Bowie YouTube channel, where I have a new interview every week that always has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, visit the blog, www.majorionbowie.com, where I have new content every single day that almost always has something to do with David Bowie. And today, I'm very, very excited to welcome a special guest, Marty Scott, founder and president, co-founder and president of JEM Records. Marty has been shaping the music industry since the early 70s, first by importing and distributing records from overseas that you couldn't find anywhere else, which is a concept that young people today probably don't fully appreciate, but it was a big issue. Acts like The Cure, Simple Minds, Susie and the Banshees, even what would become an iconic live album by Cheap Trick, JEM Records brought to the United States. Marty relaunched JEM in 2013, and now the label is about to release, at the time that we're doing this interview, a new record celebrating David Bowie. In fact, it's called JEM Records Celebrates David Bowie, featuring 11 artists from the JEM label, interpreting both familiar and less familiar Bowie songs. I have not yet heard every song on the album, but what I can say is that the first thing about it that really jumped out is what I have heard has been magnificent. And it's both a way to introduce Bowie fans to some great bands that are established and that they could see, especially if, I live in the Northeastern United States. I think, that's especially the case for folks like me that live in the Northeastern United States. You could see some of these bands. And I think it's a great introduction to them if fans don't already know them. So, Marty, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So let me ask you right off the bat, what was the impetus for creating this album?
Well, every year, most likely in August, we release a new JEM Celebrates album. It started in 2020. I wanted to do something for the 80th birthday of John Lennon, so we did JEM Records Celebrates John Lennon. And the reaction was so good that next year we did Brian Wilson, then Pete Townshend, then Ray Davies, last year Jagger Richards, and this year David Bowie. And the idea is, with all the artists on the label do a track by that particular songwriter, then the fans of that artist will become acquainted with the JEM artists. Or let's say if you're a fan of the Weaklings, but you don't know anything about the High Frequencies, you might say, hey, what's this band about? So it's a marketing tool as well as what we hope is a great record every year.
Yeah, that's great. And, the first song that I heard off the album, it is not one of Bowie's better known songs. It's called Can't Help Thinking About Me, that the Sins did. And, I'm just going to say it. I actually like their version better than Bowie's original from the 60s.
Well, if I'm correct, that was the first song he ever recorded as David Bowie. And from what I was told, Richard Barone, who's on the record, who's pretty much a Bowie aficionado and knows his son, and Tony Visconti produced him as well as Bowie. And Richard's actually sung on Bowie songs and doing backup vocals. He told me that he was pretty apprehensive back then when he changed his name to David Bowie and started to write. And it was some spontaneous lyrics and things from some of the early songs. So I think the Sins did an incredible job on it.
Yeah. Is it a risky proposition to introduce an album with a song that people might not necessarily know, as opposed to like a Heroes or a Changes or a Starman or something like that?
No, actually, I think it complements it, because if everybody did Rebel Rebel and the Gene Genie, you're not going to really best Bowie on that. But for example, I think I'm Afraid of Americans by the Airport 77 is incredible. And so I think is Kooks by the On and Ons from Australia. The High Frequencies Modern Love is a great take, as is The Sins. I mean, sure, Heroes, which Nick Puente and the Complicated Men did, which closes the album, is just a rendition of it. But everybody wants to hear, Firpanino, with Bowie from Berlin on that track.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will say, as somebody who swims in the water of Bowie fans, when we hear a less covered song done well, it's very exciting. So I thought that was great. You mentioned several of the bands. Who are some of the other bands that are featured on the album?
Well, we'll start off the Gripweeds, who have been on the label for 10 years, did Space Oddity, which their own take on it. Next is Paul Collins, the king of power pop, doing Hang On to Yourself. The Sins Can't Help Thinking About Me. The On and On's Kooks. The Anderson Council Boys Keep Swinging, who always do great tracks on the Gem Celebrate series. The Airport 77. High Frequencies, the Midnight Callers doing Changes, the Gripweeds doing Diamond Dogs, Richard Barone doing Starman. It's a live rendition of it, which is pretty amazing. And we close with Heroes by Nick Puente and the Complicated Men. 11
Yeah,
tracks by 11 different artists.
that's a great lineup. So did the bands choose which songs to do?
For the most part, they choose. And, talking to me, Paul Collins, for example, I picked that song for him because I wanted a pretty simple rock and roll song that he could really kill on it. And I think he did. Uh, like the On and Ons, where they were the first, excuse me, band to send in the track. And I wasn't really that familiar with Kooks until I realized I had heard it many, many years ago. Uh, but most of the bands pick them on their own. I know with Nick Puente, we went back and forth about a couple of tracks. Um, the Midnight Callers immediately wanted to do changes, and I think the High Frequencies went back and forth with a few songs, but they picked a great one, Modern Love. The Weaklings, Bob Berger, the Weaklings says, "Hey, we're going to do Diamond Dogs," and basically they just did it. So for the most part, they sort of know what we're looking for. We really don't want to have the standards unless it's like with the Gripweeds. Well, they'll spend hundreds of hours in the studio creating an opus. We want to do some great power pop rock and roll songs and try to bring the catalog of Bowie as we do to the catalog. Because really, the series is about the songwriters, not about the groups. So, for example, let's take Brian Wilson. There were non-Beach Boy records on that, and Pete Townsend, there were non-Who songs on that. It's them as the writers, not so much the members of those bands.
Yeah, well, that almost anticipated my next question, which was why Bowie? So let me adjust what I was about to ask you. Why do you think Bowie continues to fascinate people or to be an attraction nearly 10 years after he passed away?
Well, he's not only an androgynous, character in terms of uh, how he appeared, but his songs just last forever. I mean, the first time I saw Bowie was in a Radio City, and I guess early, like maybe 1973, I guess it was. That was the big tour when he came down from the ceiling, on the crescent moon. That's the first time I saw him live. And so I've seen him quite a few times since then. But he has all these different personas. Like you look at the cover of the album, there's like what, four different personas of Bowie on the cover, and right?
Yeah.
Think and basically people love everything he's done because he's changed. No pun intended.
Yeah. I was so excited by this record. I went down to New Jersey and interviewed the members of the Sins in Hoboken, and there's an entire building that is has a
Mural.
mural by the artist Eduardo Cobra of Bowie. So it's like his presence looms over us.
I mean, what is it, 8 stories high or something like that? I mean, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I want to hear the story of JEM Records, and you were around from the beginning. You are the M in JEM, JEM.
Yeah.
How did JEM start? And I'm really interested in how the music landscape has changed from 1970, the early 70s to 2025, where people consume music in different ways.
Well, I think the biggest change, of course, is there are really no more record stores. More records are bought, through Amazon than almost everything else put together. Most younger music fans don't buy anything; they just stream, and they don't consider music as important in their life as, let's say, people of my generation and the generation after that. Uh, when records came out, let's say in the 70s, that my wife, who is an art director in the record business, who actually her most famous cover is the first Ramones cover, so she did that. Um, when she and I were, first in the record business, people would look at the album cover, and there was only albums back then, and they would just read every word on the cover as they listened to the records. When they started to have gatefold sleeves and they had lyrics on the inside or printed inner sleeves, they would just listen to it and just go through every bit of the album cover. Now with streaming, there is no album cover. There is no lyrics. I mean, sometimes there might be a downloadable book, but most often not. So music is just another thing to do. I mean, there's kids who do video games spend more time on that than almost everything put together. So music is just something that is portable. People just go around with their, earbuds and listen to music as they're doing something else, but it's not really that important in their life as it was to people our age.
Have we, I leading question, have we lost something?
In terms of music,
As in terms of culture, have we lost a shared experience? Have we lost,
sure.
you're talking about the way we would interact with the physical record itself, the sleeve, the art, the lyric sheets. Is our 20-year-olds sort of worse off because it's not part of their existence?
Well, I mean, if you look at how artists derive their income, decades ago, live concerts supplemented the record, and the income was more from the music on recorded form, vinyl. Now, records, or in most cases, just streams, just supplement the live performance. That's where all the money is for either legacy artists or new artists. Uh, and if you notice, let's say take a rap artist, they'll put 31 tracks on their album. And some of the songs are a minute and 6 seconds. Why? So when the kids stream the whole album, they get paid an extra, stream, as opposed to, let's say, 10 to 12 tracks on what I would consider a real album. There might be 31, and those tracks are just extra little tidbits, so they'll get an extra stream when they put it on, continuous play, and they'll get 100 million streams in a week, and that's what the record is now. And then they go on tour, and that's where the money is. Records, music is really a byproduct of live performance now in terms of artists of today, whether it's a female, for the most part, pop singers or rap artists. There are very few rock groups that break through because there's no radio is useless. I mean, terrestrial radio, AM radio really means nothing except for the few songs they always played. FM music is very, very much programmed. There's very few shows. Sirius XM is probably the only place where you can get to hear something that you might want to hear because there's so many different genres. There's like what 700 and some odd different channels on Sirius XM that you can sort of get what you want when you want.
Yeah, you said something in passing, and I couldn't help but notice that a lot of the bands that are on this particular album that we're talking about are, our contemporaries, and I'm wondering if rock is, now a generational genre. Is it too edgy for younger people now?
I don't really know. I mean, I think if a younger artist does a song that is a bit edgier, then all of a sudden they like it. I mean, Olivia Rodrigo, I mean, she's really a rocker in pop, guys, so to speak. But I mean, for example, some of the bands are, let's say, my contemporaries, but I mean, the high frequencies are quite younger. The Midnight Callers are, because the Weaklings are. Richard Brown, I signed Richard Brown originally with the Bongos in 1982, when I put together Boys Drums Along the Hudson. Uh, but I see what you're saying. They have a lot of years in terms of making records, whether in this band or other bands. But I think that in the last 20, 30 years, rock music has become more of a legacy, act. Bands that were big in the late 60s, 70s, 80s go out on tour and fill arenas, while younger bands can't.
Yeah. I've talked to some younger musicians where the live experience is secondary or not even something that they're focused on because they feel a pressure to churn out a new song, every, I don't know, every week, every month, but with more with more frequency than I would imagine was the case, when you started in the business.
Well, Actually, when I started, there were bands that would put out two albums a year, right? I mean, back then. Now you're lucky if you get one album every 2 years or 3 years. But
Okay.
you see, if you're a streaming band, you can put something out every week. It's just record in your basement and just put it up there, and it's streaming. An album is a more crafted, opportunity to show what you're all about. I think streaming gives people the chance just to put anything out constantly. And if you're a major star today and you have tens of millions of fans on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, you push one button and tens of millions of people know you've put something out. There's no need for a long buildup and put one track out 6 weeks before the album comes out, because they know about it instantaneously. And that is different than older artists who basically put something out and build a whole campaign about what's coming.
Yeah. So, Marty, I've had several musicians on the show. Uh, some who worked with Bowie, some who are less well known, some that are getting started. I've never had a record executive before you, and I want to ask a question that is so basic that you're going to wonder why am I talking to this guy? What do you do? What's your job? How much time do you spend scouting out acts versus when you walk into work? What are you doing?
Well, basically, when I restarted JEM, actually, it was Richard Barone when he was doing 25th anniversary of Cool Blue Halo. He said, "Well, why don't you go back to the record business?" Because I was in another industry. So I've gone back, and it's not a full-time situation for me. I mean, I have people who I hire to do promotion and do publicity, and of course, manufacturing. And there's a lot of my contacts, for example, that get things done. I'm not one who's like I used to do, let's say, fly to Chicago to see some band at 1 o'clock in the morning and then fly back so I can, do something else. I'm pretty stationary with regard to that, and I'm not looking to sign maybe more than one or possibly even two bands a year. I just signed a band called The Jive, and this band is getting tremendous radio airplay on independent stations all over the world on their own. And they're going to be putting out an EP, I guess, on Friday through another label, which I've let them do to build some momentum. It's all alternative, different ways of getting things done. The way, JEM used to do it back when we had our own section in a store, which nobody had. When we had the little stickers on every record to know it was an import, or uh, when we first started with imports, we made posters say "Don't be xenophobic by imports," or having posters that were on the floor of the store, so when people walked, they would see our stuff. I mean, I think we were the first company ever to really push in-store airplay, the break a record, when we had the Larry Fest, who most people know from being with Peter Gabriel and doing all the synthesizers for everybody from Foreigner to Paul Simon and everyone right on down the line. When we put out the first Synergy record, since it was all electronic, synthesizers, we had stores play it on the turntables because they used to do that, and people would
Yeah.
walk up, "What's that?" and they would buy it. And eventually we got, FM airplay, but all sorts of different ways of marketing. We're doing a show on October 25th at the Cutting Room in New York. It's called JEM Records Celebrates, and it's going to be headlined by the Weaklings, the Gripweeds, the Midnight Callers, and the Sins, with special guests, Richard Barone and Paul Collins. I mean, that's going to be a show that's going to feature with six of our artists. They'll each be doing, one or two songs from JEM Records Celebrates, plus, their own material. And that's a great way of introducing some of our lesser known bands, maybe to Weaklings fans, who do much more in terms of, volume of people at shows than some of the other bands. And hopefully we'll do some other concerts in other cities the same way. Try to do different things, marketing. We try to put some of our bands together in shows in different parts of, let's say, the East Coast, in Boston or in Washington or in New Jersey or New York, and try to get them, noticed. You got to do things differently now. They're
Yeah.
not going to get airplay the way it used to be, where every single FM station in the country just waited for the next package from JEM because they knew it was going to be something cool. And we broke so many artists, and all the major record labels, would call me and say, "Hey, listen, we got this coming out in England. Like, you guys want to do something?" And then we would do the work, break the record, and they would put it out. It was a great relationship, you know.
Yeah. So now there are no or very few record stores. Where, if somebody wanted to get we're talking about celebrating David Bowie or any of the albums that JEM puts out, where could they get? Where could you get
Well,
a JEM
first of
record?
all the artists have their own websites and they sell their own records. Of course, you can go to if you want to purchase a CD, or in this case, a limited edition gold vinyl, you go to most likely to Amazon if you're living in the hinterlands or something. I mean, stores do have it, but there aren't enough stores so
Yeah.
that every place you go is going to carry it. Why? Because stores just don't have the people coming in like they used to. I mean,
Yeah.
there used to be a store in New Jersey called Vintage Vinyl. It had everything. And then after 40 years, that he just retired and nobody took its place. And there's stores in every major city, and some cities have lots of stores, but they sell a tremendous amount of used vinyl. Why? Because there's a tremendous profit in used vinyl in terms of what they have to lay out versus what they can do. They'll sell, many copies of a new release by a major artist, but they can't carry the catalog they used to, or invest in purchasing inventory for newer artists. So, the bands sell a lot on the road, the merch tables and things like that.
Do you or well, yeah, let me ask it this way. Do you sell more vinyl records or CDs?
Actually, in most of our artists, they still sell more CDs in this genre than they do vinyl. Um, we try to do colored vinyl in a lot of cases. In this album, it's gold. If you look at the cover of any of our gem records celebrates, usually the color of the word gem is going to tell you the color of the vinyl, which is sort of a little key. Uh, but I find that we sell more CDs still than we do vinyl in this genre. If you're a heavy metal artist, you're going to sell more vinyl than you're going to sell CDs. If you're a pop artist or a rap artist, you're probably going to sell anything. It's all going to be streams. It's incredible how many streams those artists can have and how few actual CDs or vinyl they might sell compared to how many millions of streams they'll get a day.
Yeah, that's actually fascinating. Marty Scott, this has been terrific. I want to close by asking you a silly question, but it's how I close all my interviews, which is oh, by the way, I'm gonna get the CD version, so just so everybody knows. Um, but what's your favorite Bowie song and your favorite Bowie album?
Well, I think the albums of the early 70s, Hunky Dory and
Ziggy
Ziggy
Stardust, maybe?
Stardust. And so I think those I liked the best when they came out. The instrumentation, I guess one was produced by Tony Visconti and one by Ken Scott, I think, both, which is interesting. Um, I always like Heroes, basically because of the production. I mean, there have been books written about the production of that track, and while Fripp and and both of them together were on Audition ZG, which I distributed at GEM. I never really had a chance to speak to either of them about the production of that. I would talk to Larry Fast, who basically knew all about it because all the work he did with all the English producers, and they would banter back and forth about, let's say, the noise gate on Phil Collins, cymbals and on Peter Gabriel's records and stuff like that. But the Heroes has always been my favorite track.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Marty Scott, JEM Records, celebrating David Bowie. I will put a link both in the show description and on the blog because if you're a Bowie fan, I think you're going to want this album. Marty, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
I, just stick with me one more moment. Can I ask you one question I could use later, not on the same
Sure.
interview?
Yeah.
So I'm going to put together a compilation of reflections on Bowie's 10-year anniversary of his passing. So I'm just going to ask you, 10 years out, it's a version of a question I asked you during the interview. 10 years out, why does David Bowie continue to hold such an appeal?
I think because of there's such variation in his persona. I mean, one year he was the Thin White Duke, and one year he was, Ziggy Stardust, and one year, on and on. He always changed. Other artists would basically, while they may be big, the records sounded the same. His records sounded different. Whether he did, Philadelphia or Berlin or England. I mean, every time he was doing something different. I think that is what kept him so much in the forefront. Even when he was working with other artists who Nile Rodgers or something like that, which is so totally different than working with Brian Eno or Tony Visconti or Ken Scott. He did things that nobody else was doing, and he challenged himself, which basically challenged us as consumers. To get into something that we may never have wanted to get into or never knew. He was always different. That's why he was like a chameleon, not only in his persona, but in his albums.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Marty. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot for contacting me.